Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Talks in Class. I'm Jenna. Hope you've all had a fabulous week and happy March. Cannot believe it's March already. But also, now that I say that, I can believe that because I feel like I've lost all sense of time. This is one thing that's really throwing me off, I've noticed since being in LA, is that I am recognizing now how much I have always kind of used weather as a way to gauge time, especially when living on the East Coast or in the Midwest, places with extreme seasons and extreme weather. Like when I think back to certain memories of things happening, a lot of how I situate those memories within a framework of time is by the season or the weather, or, I'll remember what I was wearing, whether I was dressed in shorts and a tank top or I was bundled up for the cold, or if there was some sort of weather event, because there's often some sort of weather event happening that we talk about. And that just kind of helps me figure out what time of year it was. And it also helps me figure out how much time has passed. You can think about full years passing because you think of a full winter, a full summer. But here, the weather is so much less extreme. So I'm realizing that this does not work. I have been thinking kind of like in the back of my mind for the past couple of months since we've been here that it's April or maybe May, sometime in that spring season, because the weather we've been having here feels like spring that we're used to on the East Coast. But obviously it's not. It's only March. But really, 2023 has gone by really, really quickly. I will say the first couple of months of this year have flown by. It's really true that time passes faster and faster the older you get, and it's a very strange thing. I remember people saying this when I was younger, older people, and I didn't really understand what they meant, but now I get it. Remember when we were kids and a single school year felt like a lifetime? Even when I think back to memories, so much happened and so much kind of could change within the course of a single school year, and now I feel like every time I blink, another month has gone by. And we're like, oh, I can't believe it's this month or this holiday. And I guess this is just adulthood. But I am really happy that March is here. I'm happy we're getting closer to the spring season, the official start of spring. There are some things that I'm really looking forward to this spring. And honestly, it really has been cold. I finally broke down and turned the heat on today. So I am ready to move on from winter. I'm ready to put winter 2023 behind us. So anyway, I hope you've all had a great week. It's kind of been business as usual over here. Nothing too new or exciting to note. But as always, I will start with my what good happened. And like I said, it's been a pretty uneventful week. We had a ton of rain again. This is our second long stretch of rain in the past couple of months. And that just always makes me feel really blah and kind of unmotivated, and obviously doesn't lend itself too well to activities. But we did have one nice day, really nice sunny day, kind of in the middle of this stretch of several days of rain, and it was this past Sunday. So my friend and I decided to just have ourselves a little day. Those days when you just go hang out with a friend and you don't really have any set agenda, there's no errands to run, or there's no goals for the hang. You're just like hanging out and kind of going wherever the day takes you. We had a little day like that, and those are my favorite days, those sort of aimless days. So we just drove around. We love driving around and like looking at houses and kind of exploring different neighborhoods. So we did that, and then we just went and wandered around one of our favorite little shopping areas and had lunch, and it was just nice. It was a nice, relaxing day, and it felt so good to be able to do that and get out of the house and be outside a little bit after being stuck inside in the rain for a few days. So it was very convenient and lucky for us that that one single nice day happened to be on a Sunday when we weren't at work. And speaking of work, that leads me right into today's topic, which happens to be jobs. Specifically, jobs my friends and I had as teens and college students in the 2000s. I don't know about you guys, but I always felt like having a job was super important as a teenager. Not just for the obvious money factor, but it was some sort of kind of status symbol and social outlet. In the teen world, it gave you an extra layer of identity and an extra social circle beyond just high school and kind of what you had going on as a high school student. And certain jobs were just super cool to have. They were an automatic like status upgrade if you had certain jobs. They got you a good discount, your friends could come visit you. And then of course there was the money factor, having money that was yours and not your parents', with which you could do what you wanted for the most part. And that was very exciting. That's a very freeing feeling for a teenager. Honestly, for me, the jobs were not really about the money. I mean, we were teenagers after all. When I think back to being a teenager, one of the best things about it was that we just had all of these essential items that just magically appeared in the house. Like we didn't have to pay for those essential items. We didn't have to buy shampoo. We didn't have to buy toilet paper. We didn't have to buy laundry detergent or dog food or probably a lot of food. Like the groceries were just stocked. Somehow there were always Pop-Tarts in my kitchen cabinet. It was like magic. And now as an adult, I'm like, man, that was really nice. I would like to go back to that. But for most of us, we did have a few air quotes expenses. I mean, I'm using that term very loosely. And for those things that we wanted but did not necessarily need, our parents told us, well, you better go get a job. I needed money for a few essential items, such as getting my disposable camera pictures developed, which also was very expensive for what it was. Lip gloss, particularly expensive lip gloss that I, for some reason, felt like I just had to have, like MAC or Lancome Juicy Tubes. Gas for my car, which cost me a whopping $20 to fill my entire gas tank. I used to fill my gas tank using quarters that I found in the center console of my vehicle. Blank CDs for our burned CD mixes. Those were also really expensive, and we went through them like crazy because every occasion called for a new burned CD mix. So we had to have a school dance burned CD to get ready for the dances. If anybody had a birthday, you made them a burned CD. If someone was having a party, burned CD party mix, right? So those were high on my list of necessities. Getting my nails done, also expensive. And then, things like Von Dutch gear, which my mom thought, rightfully so, was very overpriced. So, these were my essentials. These were my motivating factors for working as a teenager. I would also try to hoard my lunch money for extra spending money. So I lived right by my high school and we had open campus lunch, which meant that as long as you didn't get in your car, as long as you went somewhere within walking distance, you could leave school at lunch, which thinking back, like I'm really surprised that we had this in my high school because I don't know, this just seems like a security issue. They just like let us free. And they're like, well, as long as you get back on time, you can go wherever you want. But I happened to live right next to my high school, so we could walk to my house. So while most kids would either eat at school or they would walk across the street to the grocery store to get lunch, I would go home, eat lunch there, and then stockpile the money that my mom would give me to buy lunch. And as you can imagine, this didn't get me very far because obviously my mom realized pretty quickly that all of our food in the house was gone because I was also feeding all of my friends naturally so they could stockpile their lunch money. But then she was also giving me money for lunch every day, so that ended very quickly. I remember one time my friends and I went to my house on lunch break and we tried to make a frozen pizza. I think we only had 30 minutes for the entire lunch break. It was not a long time. So by the time the oven preheated and we put the pizza in, we weren't going to have enough time to actually eat it once it was done baking in the oven. So we had to get back to school. We waited until the last possible minute and we had to go back to school. So I just shut the oven off, left the pizza in there, and we went back to school. We probably grabbed a Pop-Tart and, I don't know, a Kudos bar from the cabinet to eat instead of the pizza. But what I didn't realize as a 16-year-old was that the pizza would continue cooking we had one of those pizza stone things. It was like a stone that you would cook your pizza on. So I didn't realize or take into account that the pizza would continue cooking on that very hot stone inside the oven, even though I had turned the oven off. So I came home to find this little shriveled up pizza, absolutely freaking burnt to a crisp, like sitting inside the oven. It was all warped and misshapen. It was completely black. I actually think my mom might have discovered it. I don't remember if it was her or me, but either way, the lunch money stashing plan backfired on me miserably. So I had to get a job. I grew up in a tiny rural kind of farm town in Wisconsin. So it wasn't uncommon for kids to start working really young, especially because a lot of kids grew up on farms. So they grew up kind of working on the farm because they had to help their parents. They weren't necessarily getting paid, but this was not uncommon. So naturally, I got my first job at the ripe old age of 14, the summer after 8th grade. And my first job was detasseling corn on a farm. So if you've never heard of detasseling corn, I mean, I would say that that's very understandable. We would all stand on this tractor, and the tractor would drive down the rows of corn really slowly, and we would just pull the tops of the corn off, which were like tassels. And I don't honestly know what the purpose of this was. Obviously, it had some sort of purpose because they paid a bunch of teenagers to do it every day in the summer, but that's what we would do. And that was our entire job. We would pull the tops of the corn off and we'd throw it on the ground. We loved this. This was appealing to us because you really didn't have to do anything aside from the fact that the tassels of the corn or like the leaves of the corn would tear your hands to shreds. I don't know why we didn't wear gloves. We weren't smart enough for that, I guess. But you get all these little tiny cuts all over your hands from pulling those corn tassels off. But aside from that, I mean, you really didn't do anything. The tractor moved really slow, so you would have to really put an effort to not be able to pull the corn tops off. We basically were just standing there for hours chatting with our friends because obviously everybody did this. So you're with a bunch of your classmates and it was in the summer and it was outside. So you would get a tan while you did it. This was the era of the tankini. So we would wear a tankini top with like our little denim shorts and we'd go out there and we would pull the tops off the corn while we were chatting with all of our friends, and then we would go home. That was it. That was the work day. We also had to be there at some ungodly hour in the morning. I think we had to be there at like, I don't know, 5:30 in the morning or something, but we were 14. So obviously we couldn't drive. We didn't have cars. So our poor parents took turns carpooling us there. I think there was a group of 5 or 6 of us who all worked together, and every morning one of the moms would drive around, and this is in rural America, so we did not live close together. I mean, it was probably a 20-minute loop to pick up all the kids and then drop us off at the farm, and then I guess maybe a different parent would pick us up after and then reverse the loop to drop us all back home. I mean, it was honestly probably so much more work for our parents than it was worth, but we loved it. And this was the thing that like everyone did in my school. I can't imagine how much money we actually made. I mean, what was minimum wage in 2001? Like $6 an hour. And it was only for a few hours in the morning and it was only for the summer. But it was really the ideal summer job because it was only in the morning. And then we would get home usually around lunchtime and you'd have the whole rest of the day to do whatever you wanted. It was perfect, amazing. I think I did it for 2 summers. So that would have been summer 2001 when I was 14 and summer 2002 when I was 15. And then in 2003, when I turned 16, I got my driver's license and a whole new world of teenage part-time jobs opened up for me. Living in a super small town obviously limited the job options for kids at my school, but we had a few. Our town had a couple supper clubs. I feel like this is such a small town or maybe like Midwestern thing. I mean, what even is a supper club? I'm not sure, but in my town, the supper clubs were restaurants with bars. That part is really important. They were, I think, supposed to feel kind of fancy, and they all had nightly specials, you know, the usual Midwestern things. Friday night fish, Saturday, I think it was prime rib, that type of thing. They probably had like a really good salad bar. I love a salad bar. I think that's the Midwest in me for sure. These supper clubs are where all the adults in town went to get absolutely wasted, but in a tasteful way. You know, this was the Midwest small town boomer version of brunch. Like, it was a place to get totally smashed, but in a way that seems classy and socially acceptable. So some kids worked at supper clubs as bussers or dishwashers or hosts, and then maybe they'd eventually work up to servers. We also had a couple short-lived little town pizza places where some kids worked. I remember there was this one pizza place that a bunch of people in my class worked at, and it was kind of this group of friends that all worked there together. And I remember two of the girls who worked at that pizza place got into this major drama one year, and they had to work with each other there. I mean, talk about tension. There were probably like 3 people in the entire pizza place, and 2 of them wanted to kill each other. But the job options were relatively limited, so our next option was to branch out into neighboring towns. The nearest mall, movie theater, Best Buy, Target, anything like that was in a town about 20 minutes away from my hometown. So if you worked at one of those places, it was a definite upgrade, but you also had to commute to get to work. So this was a trade-off. Working at the mall was obviously absolutely elite. So we ignored the inconvenience of driving there and the added gas expenses. And if you worked in the mall in high school, it was like you were somehow part of this unspoken club, like an elite group of retail workers. You knew the best spots in the food court. You probably had a friend who could get you some sort of discount at most good places in the mall. I think our nail salon in the mall might have actually done a discount for mall employees also. Highly elite, okay? From the moment I started working, I had my sights set on working at the mall, but not just any mall store. I wanted to work at Express. You guys, I don't know what it was about Express that had me in this hold in high school, but I lived at that store. I was obsessed with it. I think it's because they kind of had a little bit of everything. It wasn't just one aesthetic, like somewhere like American Eagle or PacSun. They had, dress pants and blazers. They had formal dresses. They had jeans and basic t-shirts. You could kind of find everything there, and I shopped there so much that the employees literally knew me. The problem was, though, that you had to be 18 to work at Express. So I had 2 long years until I could get a job there. After detasseling corn, I got a job at one of the restaurants near where I lived. And it was some serious small town situations at that restaurant. Obviously, we knew every single person who worked there. I always worked Sunday mornings, and we had to be there at like 5 a.m., something super, super early. My friend, one of my classmates, was the cook there. And he also happened to be one of the houses that was a party spot where we would have bonfires a lot of the time. So it was not uncommon that the 2 of us would open the restaurant, and the night before we would have been at a huge bonfire at his house. So the 2 of us would show up reeking like bonfire smoke, deathly hungover. We'd like see each other in the parking lot and kind of give each other the nod. And then one of us would go across the street to the gas station and stock up on Gatorades for the shift. I remember one time, not my friend, but a different cook that was working was so hungover on a Sunday morning that he went and took a nap in like the back office. I guess just on the floor. And I remember him saying, like, if a table comes in, just come wake me up and I'll cook the food. So as you can expect, the second I turned 18, I quit the restaurant and I went to work at Express. And I remember being so excited about that job change because I wouldn't have to go wash the food stench off of myself before going out after work. Literally, that's what I looked forward to about working in retail instead of a restaurant. Being able to go straight out to a party after work because I'd already be in a cute outfit. The things 18-year-olds prioritize, right? Never mind that I made about $7 an hour at the mall and I spent every single penny on clothes. I don't even know how I managed to have gas to get me to my mall job because I bought so many clothes while working at Express. I didn't care. I loved it. I felt so cool in all of my Express clothes. But I do remember finding it really, really boring. So it makes sense that when I got to college, I went back to working in restaurants. Actually, when I think about it, to this day, my favorite part-time job that I ever had, I think, was working as a server at Famous Dave's restaurant in La Crosse during college. We had such a great crew of people that worked at that restaurant, and we all hung out. People were roommates, people were dating, people were really good friends. When we would finish with our shift, we'd go have a couple of drinks at the bar in the restaurant, and then we'd go out together. But you know what? If you worked in a restaurant in college, then you know what I mean by this. Restaurant people in college are a different breed. We had stamina like no other. I used to work double shifts all the time. I loved working a double because I could make so much money in a double shift, and then I could work fewer days and still make the same amount of money. This was literally like 10 or 11 a.m. until 9 or 10 p.m. just working all the way through. And I would do this days in a row. That alone, just thinking about that, makes my 35-year-old self feel like I need an Advil and a nap and a large glass of water. But we would not only do this days in a row, but we would do this with the most intense hangovers you could ever imagine. I mean, think about a college hangover. And I would have that level of hangover, college level, 21-year-old level hangover, and I would serve people food all day from a hot kitchen. I still have the most vivid memory of this one time. I was working a lunch shift, and I think it was the beginning of a double, and I was so hungover, you guys, like top 10 hangovers of my entire life, maybe top 5. It was bad. And I was standing in front of this table, and they were taking forever to figure out what they wanted to order. It was one of those things where they were like, yeah, we're ready, but then they weren't ready. So I'm standing at this table waiting for them to order. And I literally thought I was going to have to sprint to the bathroom to throw up. I can still remember exactly what table it was in the restaurant. I was standing there like deep breaths, sweating, just praying that I didn't vomit on this table. It was so bad. I think I was supposed to work a double that day, but I gave away my dinner shift because I just could not make it through. But normally we pushed through, and then we just did it all over again the next day. It's truly remarkable to think back on. And even though serving is legitimately difficult physical work, and I would be so exhausted at the end of a night, even as a young person, I really loved it. It went by super fast. I loved working with my friends, and walking out of your restaurant job as a college student with a big old wad of cash from the night, hopping in my little white Jetta and driving back to my little college apartment with my roommates to eat a box of mac and cheese and then start pre-gaming for the night out. I mean, that feeling was unmatched. I did have a few other jobs during my college career as well. I worked at Hollister for one single shift before I quit in 2007. That is a very notable job, even though it only lasted one day. It was a brand new store that had just opened in our mall. I remember the interview was a group interview, literally in the food court. I mean, I make jokes about stuff like this, but this was really the experience. So we all sat in a circle in the food court in front of Rocky Rococo's and answered the weirdest, most irrelevant questions I could ever imagine. I mean, I think that they were just trying to find an excuse to put us all in a room so that they could see what we looked like, because there was no way any of our answers to those questions had any bearing on whether or not we were hired. Then I show up for my first day on the job. It's like a Tuesday, right? The middle of the week. No one's in that mall. It's a small town anyway. Nobody's in the mall. There were probably 6 or 7 people working. I mean, the store was full of employees, 2 managers working, no customers. I think maybe I saw 1 customer throughout my entire shift, but I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I remember standing next to my little room, you know, you're assigned a room, and I remember standing next to my little room, and the person that was working in the next room kind of walked over so that we were standing still in our designated rooms, but close enough to each other to talk, and the manager came over and told us that we weren't allowed to talk to each other. And then she made me refold a table of t-shirts that literally hadn't been touched. I mean, they were perfectly folded, and she was like, go refold that table. And then she asked me to go get her a lemonade from the food court, and that was my shift. So the next day I called to put in my 2 weeks notice, and they just told me I never had to come back. And I really got the feeling from that phone call that this was a really common occurrence. So I wasn't offended. And then I worked at a tanning salon. I don't think I have ever in my life, probably to this day, been so excited to be hired for a job as I was to get hired at that tanning salon. We got to tan for free, so obviously this is the entire reason I wanted to work there. But this particular tanning salon, it had 2 locations in town, and it was locally owned, and it was the place to go for tanning. We didn't have a Palm Beach Tan or like a chain tanning salon in our town, we had this place. This was the place to go. And it was just really vibey. I don't know how to describe it. It had all the vibe. It obviously had tanning, but it had a spray tan. It also had a sauna. And the owner was also a massage therapist. And I feel like they sold like wellness supplements. So it was kind of like a wellnessy place before that was really a thing. But I loved it. I thought it was so cool. I was so pumped to work there. Honestly, working in a tanning salon sounded like the best job you could ever imagine. But you guys, I can't stress this enough. Do not underestimate how disgusting people are. And at a tanning salon, I mean, you really get a feel for how gross the general public can be. I think the worst part, just in general, was the day-to-day just contact with strangers' sweat constantly. I mean, you'd have to go in and clean the beds, obviously, but I would think about myself sweating in the tanning bed like a normal amount, a little bit of perspiration on my skin. No. Some people were sweaters and there would be puddles in the tanning bed. I mean, you'd have to bring in multiple towels to first wipe up the puddle of sweat, and then you'd spray it down and then clean it. And then you'd have to go over it a couple more times because there'd be streaks on the bed. I mean, it was disgusting. People would leave their sweat-soaked towels in a ball on the floor and you'd have to pick it up rather than just, I mean, there was like a drop for the dirty towels. No. They couldn't be bothered. They'd leave it on the tanning bed. People would leave the weirdest things behind in the room. I mean, how do you leave your underwear in a tanning room? Wouldn't you put that back on after? You would think so, but people would leave that behind. I mean, really unsanitary things you would find in there. And the worst was when it would get really, really busy and the appointments were back to back because it would get so hot in the tanning salon. And then obviously the beds were super hot. So the whole place smelled like, coconut and burnt skin and sweat. Everybody was sweating so much more than usual in the bed. We were sweating because we were running around. It was busy. We're like scrubbing the beds. It was disgusting. It was like a gym, but with coconut scented lotion. And then we would leave at the end of the shift and we would just be covered in sweat. And it was like, is this my sweat? Is this other people's sweat? Who knows? It was just a cocktail of sweat all over us at all times. And we would always tan after our shifts. Like every single time we would finish working, we would tan because it was free. So, you got to use it. So the way it worked at our tanning salon was that one person would leave shortly before close and then the other person would close alone. And if you were the closer, you would just, after you finished your closing duties, clock out, lock the little tanning salon door and jump in the bed and tan. So we were just completely alone in a dark, empty tanning salon, jamming out to Colby Calais in the bed. I mean, that's not creepy at all. I also worked at Wet Seal for one holiday season. I remember they stopped scheduling me for like weeks on end, which made sense because I was hired as holiday. So I just assumed, they don't need me anymore. I'm done working here. And then out of the blue one day, maybe in late January, the manager called me and asked me if I could work this specific shift. And I said no because I had something to do. And then she fired me. And I was like, I didn't think I worked there anymore. It was really weird. So I was curious to see what some of your first jobs were as teenagers in the 2000s. So I polled you guys on Instagram, and I am going to end this episode by rating some of your first jobs based on how cool I think they would have been as a teenager in the 2000s. Kicking us off on the list is the classic teen job, which of course is babysitting. I give this a solid 4 out of 5 for one reason and one reason only, and that is the Babysitter's Club movie. Ever since the Babysitter's Club movie came out in, I think, 1995, I had it drilled into my brain that babysitting was an elite way to earn money. It meant that you were old enough, mature enough is probably a better word, to actually be trusted to care for a child. And when I was young, I had really cool babysitters. So this felt like a cool way to earn money to me. Next is Old Navy. This person also mentioned specifically that her first day working at Old Navy was Black Friday. I feel like this should be literally illegal. I am also going to give this 4 out of 5. Any retail was pretty elite. Old Navy wasn't in the mall, so we have to deduct 1 point for that, but I still give this high marks because Old Navy had cute clothes, and anywhere that gave you a solid employee discount on something that your friends would envy was cool. Next is lifeguard. You really can't get much higher on the elite teen job scale in my mind than a lifeguard. It required special skills. You would get a tan while you were working. And I feel like lifeguards are just hot as a general rule. I mean, it implies that you have some sort of physical fitness level. I mean, elite, 5 out of 5, perfect. Next is Arby's in the mall food court. Very specific. This is going to be a 3 out of 5 for me. Fast food wasn't necessarily super high on the cool scale, but the mall absolutely was. And even if you didn't work in the mall stores that sold clothes, you probably had a lot of friends who did because you worked inside the mall. So 3 out of 5. Next is the grocery store. I'm going to give this 2 out of 5. You probably had a bad uniform with like a smock, no notable employee discount, but for some reason this feels somehow adult to me. So it gets 2 out of 5 for that. Hostess at an Italian restaurant, also very specific. This is a 4 out of 5 for me. Hostessing was cute. It was a cute job. You didn't really have to do much actual work. I was a host briefly and it was shockingly easy. And also a lot of the hosts got to wear a cute outfit that they would pick. Like you got to wear your own clothes instead of the boring uniforms that the servers had to wear. Also, Italian restaurants are automatically fancy in the eyes of a teenager. So 4 out of 5. Next is a tanning salon. I am absolutely shook that one of you had a tanning salon as your first job ever. Very envious. Some of you had very cool first jobs. This is obviously 5 out of 5. Absolutely elite job. If I would have known anybody working at a tanning salon in high school, I would have lost my mind over how cool I thought they were. Birthday party hostess at a bowling alley. Interesting. This is a 4 out of 5 for me. For the uniqueness, first of all, it's a very unique job. Not a lot of people probably had a job like this. I mean, if you asked your friend, like, what do you do? And they're like, I work at Dairy Queen. And you're like, well, I'm a birthday party hostess at the bowling alley. I mean, you automatically sound cooler because your job is weird. But also, anything having to do with events in any way, no matter how tangential, sounded like a fancy PR job to me as a teenager. So in my mind, you were basically Heidi working at Bowl House. Next is working at the Giants Stadium. This was your first job. They didn't specify what the job was, but it doesn't even matter. 5 out of 5. Teenage me living in a town with one stoplight would have thought that this was celebrity level employment, even if you were literally cleaning the toilets. Walmart. This is a solid 3 out of 5. Retail in general was good. Walmart wasn't quite as cute as Target, but definitely better than Kmart or, Shopko maybe. Also, Walmart had the Mary Kate and Ashley line and a photo developing center, so I loved Walmart. Camp counselor. This has babysitter vibes for sure. You were automatically looked up to by the children that you were in charge of at the camp, but it was outdoorsy and it was seasonal, so it loses a couple cool points for that. You probably also had to wear weird khakis and an ugly polo shirt, so 3 out of 5 for camp counselor. Maintenance at the public pool, and this person specified that they took out the trash. Honestly, this would be a 1, but I'm going to give it 2 because the pool was a cool place in my town. We really liked hanging out at the pool. It wasn't lame or uncool to hang out at a place like that. So if you worked there, that earns you cool points because working somewhere that we wanted to hang out was cool. Newspaper delivery. I don't know how I forgot that this was a job that a lot of people probably had, especially as a first job. I don't know who delivered the newspaper in my town, but I don't remember anybody I know ever doing this. I feel like this is kind of a cool job. I'm going to give this 4 out of 5 because like detasseling corn, this was pretty easy. It was outside. It was just in the morning. You probably just got to ride your bike around town and not really do anything. I mean, that's a pretty legit job. 4 out of 5. I'm going to stand by that. And last but not least, the elite of the elite, Hollister and or Abercrombie, obviously 5 out of 5. The fact that some of you worked at Hollister or Abercrombie as your first job ever is shocking to me because, again, my first job was pulling the tops off of corn on a farm when I was 14. You are very, very cool. Any job that called their employees models and you basically had to be invited to even apply was obviously elite. Never mind that looking back, that's very creepy and highly problematic. In the 2000s, this was as cool as you possibly could get. There were a ton of other submissions. I wish I could have included all of them. It was actually very difficult for me to choose my favorites, but I felt like this was a pretty good representation of the list. So I hope you enjoyed this little discussion of our jobs in the 2000s. I'm very curious what everybody else had as jobs, whether it was your first job or your favorite job. Let me know. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who might also enjoy it. I will be back next week. Until then, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Have a wonderful week. Bye.